southeastern Minnesota, town. Something just happened. I apologize. I live in southeastern Minnesota in Winona. I have a small custom manufacturing business where it's kind of a fab shop, engineering shop. We build different process equipment for manufacturers kind of around the state and country and North America, really, and Asia. And then I've got two kids, two girls. One of them's turning 9 shortly, and the other one is 10. And a wife, and we've got dogs and cats and all that kind of stuff too. So this airplane here is my 1969 M20C Mooney.
Dan, could you put it in presentation mode for us, please?
Oh, it's not?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Again, I'll get this figured out.
No, it's all good.
Well, where do I do that now? This is
go down to the bottom, and there's that little icon of the TV screen.
Oh,
click on that.
Okay. How about now?
That's awesome. Perfect. Thank you.
It's working? Okay, thank you, everybody. So anyway, yeah, this is my 1969 C model Mooney that I had. I bought it in, I think, 2010, and put about 800 hours on it before the accident. And the accident, coincidentally, was 6 years ago, almost today. It was on the February 2nd of 2017. So 6 years ago, right now, I was in the hospital recovering from this day. This was a great airplane. It was, we used it a lot. These are pictures from all individual trips. Some of them are kind of the same place, but they were different trips. So we've had it to the Bahamas, and I've had it to Pacific Northwest several times. My wife and I did the Hudson corridor. We flew, spent some time in New York. It's been to Florida a bunch. And by today's standards, it's not great, but it had a really nice panel for then. I had a Garmin 530 WAS, and I had an S-Tech 30 autopilot with altitude hold, and it had everything I really needed. It was a great airplane. So back in 2017, I had a meeting where I needed to get up to Thunder Bay, Canada. And down here is where Winona's located. Thunder Bay is right up here. And so I figured, you know what, it's going to be way easier to fly because the drive is about a 7 to 8 hour drive, and the flight's 2.5 hours. So I thought I could fly up, do the meetings, meet with this potential customer, and then come home the same day. Yet if I drove, it would be a 2-day trip. They wanted me to come up in the middle of winter, and so I was really cautious. And they were kind of they were willing to wait for when I could come, which was nice. So it was a couple of weeks of planning, waiting for a weather window. And then this high pressure system moved over the upper Midwest, and there was no clouds in the whole area. But in the winter up here, that usually means it gets cold. So it got really cold. There was very little wind and no clouds. So it was a beautiful day, except the temperatures were 0 to 5 degrees were the high Fahrenheit. And they would dip down at night, I think probably 15 below. So I was planning this trip. This was my first time to fly into Canada. So I did lots of planning for the week leading up to it, making sure I knew how to clear into Canadian customs, making sure my EAPIS was filed correctly for leaving the country. And I did all that the day before I got everything planned. And I spoke to Canadian Customs and told them when I was going to be arriving, and got ready to go. And that dictated a 6:30 a.m. departure. So at 6:30 a.m., I got up and hustled out to the airport. The airplane was plugged in overnight, so it was heated up both in the cockpit and the engine, and it was ready to go. And I pull the airplane out, get in, and go. And I was about 15 minutes late, so it was about 6:45 when I took off. In the climb out of Winona, I had gotten something stuck in my eye, and I remember wiggling my eye and rubbing it, and I thought to myself, could this be carbon monoxide? And I turned the heater off, turned the air on, and then I got my eye clear, and I realized, that doesn't have anything to do with carbon monoxide. That's not a symptom. And the reason I talked about that, or I'm talking about that, is that was the only time I thought about carbon monoxide the rest of the day. So I turned the heat back on, I got comfortable again, and I climbed up to a 11,000 feet. I was on an IFR flight plan, actually 10,000 feet, and then I went up to 11, crossing the corner of the lake here. But the the other thing in the climb that I noticed was, I've got some pictures here. This shows Winona, the Thunder Bay. This was a picture coming out of Winona. So I was climbing out of Winona. I had just taken off. I was probably just maybe 2,000 feet, and it was almost -10 already. So it was very cold, but you can see around the windows got frost on it. And I was really fascinated with this, but I had some frost on the windscreen and I had full frost on the side windows. Now I've ran into that before if I had 4 people in the plane and it was really cold, but usually when I was by myself, the defrost would keep up and it would clear everything. And I thought that it was just so cold that this is what was happening, and I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. In hindsight, I believe this was condensation from exhaust that was leaking into the airplane. So this is just a shot when I was kind of crossing the corner of the lake on that flight heading up. This is another shot heading up the lake. I always loved on the 530 zooming out to see the larger features. This does nothing for navigation, but it was just fun to see. And if you're an AOPA member, they don't advertise this, but you get an ice scraper too. It works out really good. And I just thought that was funny, so I took a picture. So I'd clear my side windows with this frost with that as I was going up. Now, the flight itself, I had no symptoms at all from CO during the flight, or the majority of the flight. When I was up at a 10,000 or 11,000 feet, I don't recall when, but I put on my pulse oximeter and checked my O2 sats. I don't remember what they were, but I remember they were higher than they normally are. And that just relayed to me. I'm like, oh, everything's doing good. I'm doing great this morning. And I put that away and I didn't think about it. I was going to bring along my portable my portable oxygen system. And I misplaced it. I think I took it to work to refill it. And then I left it in my office. And when I came to the hangar, it wasn't where I normally put it. And so I didn't bring it. If I did, I probably wouldn't even be talking to you guys today. I probably would have, well, yeah, I probably would have made it back to Winona, because I would always put on my oxygen at night, and my last flight was a night flight. So this is about 10 minutes out of Thunder Bay. That's looking at Lake Superior, and I would have been in Canada there. And that was about the time I started to get a headache, and it was a real slight headache. And I always drink, at that time, I used to always drink coffee to start the day. And being that it was an early start, I didn't drink any coffee that morning. So I justified the slight headache I was getting by not having coffee yet. When I landed at Thunder Bay, it was very, very cold. And I taxied in, I think this was the ramp I used here, but I come taxiing in and I park and I shut down and I called Canadian Customs. And that was the procedure at the time, was I was to call Customs, tell them when I landed, where I was, and they would either tell me to stay put and send somebody out, or they would give me a clearance code and clear me into the country. So when I was talking to the customs agent, I told them that I just landed, and he goes, "At what time?" And I said, "Well, about 9:15, just right now, just a few minutes ago." And he seemed really confused with that, and he just kind of fumbled around and he said, "Here's your code, have a good day," type of thing. And so I got out of the plane and I sprinted into the FBO building. I secured the plane. I got it. I think I plugged in the engine heater and stuff and got it so it was ready to go. But I sprinted into the FBO building, and in there, trying to get my rent-a-car, I had this horrible feeling of anxiety, or this feeling of butterflies. I don't normally get butterflies or anxiety, but I felt that I had this feeling, and I found out at that moment that Thunder Bay in the winter was on Eastern Eastern time zone, not central like I was in Chicago and everybody else around here. So when I talked to the customs agent, he was legitimately confused because I told him I just landed at 9:15 when it was actually 10:15. So part of me worried, and I thought that they were going to come anyway, even though he gave me a clearance code and I was going to be in trouble. And that was how I was justifying this butterfly feeling, this uneasiness feeling that I had. So it was based on customs clearance, not actual other factors that it could have been. So now my headache has gotten a little bit worse, but I'm out of the airplane and still no caffeine. And then I had this anxiety feeling, which I thought was because I messed up the clearance into Canadian customs. They never came. I got my rent-a-car and I went to my customer. Now I was actually an hour late to get to my customer also. So once I got there, they were busy with some other meetings and asked if I could come back after lunch. So I hopped in the car and I went to, I found a nice restaurant and I got a couple cups of coffee and I got lunch. And after that, I started to feel a little better. My headache started, it didn't completely go away, but it went away enough that it was just in the back of my mind. It wasn't something that was really bothering me. And then I went in back to my customer. We did that. And then I'm leaving an hour later now too, or even more than an hour later, because I didn't anticipate being in Thunder Bay until 3:30 in the afternoon. So I get back to the airport. My airplane was still plugged in. And I went out and I got the EAPIS was, I think I filed the EAPIS the day before, but everything was set to go. And I was flying IFR back into Minnesota, into Duluth to clear customs there. So I get in the airplane and it won't start and it won't start and it won't start. So it was so cold soaked. The oil temp was okay, but the air was so cold inside the engine compartment. I couldn't get the fuel to vaporize and ignite. So I had to order a preheat. So they came and they started preheating the engine. I had to call the US Customs back and tell them I was delayed because of everything going on. Because US Customs in Duluth, you have to get in touch with them beforehand so they can send an agent to the airport. They don't keep one there all the time. So I got that done. There was some anxiety with it. And then I departed. And then that flight to Duluth was absolutely gorgeous. There was, other than it was very cold, but there was no wind. It was smooth. I've got some pictures. Here's the trip to Duluth, and it's just right down the coast of Lake Superior there. And it was beautiful. This was the last photo I took out of this airplane. And this was just about 10 miles north of Duluth, heading down the coast. And you can see that's actually the Wisconsin shoreline over there. So we're kind of at a V of the lake. So I could see across. But it was a beautiful flight and I didn't have any symptoms and I felt good. And the airplane was running good. Now, the second I landed in Duluth and I got out of the airplane, I got a splitting headache. It was like someone slapped me. I mean, it was just instant and it was quick, but it was when I was out of the airplane. So I stood up on the wing, got the splitting headache. The custom agent literally runs out because it's so cold. He runs around the airplane really quick. We shut the door and run into the FBO. We finished the paperwork and he said, we'll see you next time. And he left. I called my wife to tell her that I had cleared into customs and I was going to be heading back to Winona shortly. She asked if she wanted to save dinner for me. And I said, no, don't worry about it. I'll figure out something when I get home. And I said, I'll be in Winona in about an hour and a half. So I run back out to the plane and quick pre-flight, and I get in the plane and I wanted to start it because I didn't want it to get cold soaked like it did up in Thunder Bay. So I started it and I hadn't filed a flight plan or anything yet. And I went and started the airplane, got it running, and it was running good. And then I filed my IFR flight plan to Winona on my iPad. And I knew that when I did that, I would get a notification on my iPad once it's been accepted into the system. And I couldn't get my clearance until I got that notice because they wouldn't have any record of my IFR flight plan. So I filed the flight plan and I was letting it sit on my knee pad, waiting for it to or I guess sitting on the yoke, waiting for the notice to come back. And then I started tidying up the airplane, getting it ready for the flight. And now it's about 6 o'clock now. It's already dark. And I put on my headlamp. I always wore a headlamp. I still wear a headlamp if I fly at night in case there's an electrical failure. So I put the headlamp on. I had my flashlight on the seat next to me. My hat and my gloves were on the seat next to me. I was wearing a sweatshirt and I had a Carhartt jacket, but I had that off in the back seat just because it was so bulky inside the airplane. But I got everything tidied and ready to go, and I felt really, really prepared. So then once I got ready, I got the notification that was in the system. I was able to contact ATC to get my clearance. And now I've included some of the or all of the audio I have from live ATC here. So here I am parked over at the ramp, and I call clearance to get or I call ground to get my clearance. And when I listen to this, I can tell that I'm impaired, but I don't really sound impaired. And you'll be able to hear as time progresses how bad it gets.
Duluth ground, Mooney 90149 Victor.
Mooney 90149 Victor, Duluth ground.
Yeah, Mooney 49 Victor, we're over here at the FBO with information Sierra. We're ready to copy RFR to Winona.
Mooney 49 Victor, clear to the Winona Airport as filed. Maintain 6,000, expect 9,000, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 125.45, squawk 4250.
Cleared Winona as filed, 6,000. I expect 9,000, 10 minutes, 125.45 departure, and 4250. Victor.
Mooney 49 Victor, read back correct.
So I can tell from that I am impaired a little bit. I normally wouldn't say my airplane call sign twice in one transmission, and I think I did there. And just I didn't quite sound up to it. And then right after that, I got my taxi
Duluth
clearance.
ground, Mooney 90149 Victor, we're ready to taxi also.
Mooney 90149 Victor, Duluth ground, hold your position on the ramp.
So I was at this point, I taxied right over to this area right here, right near the tower. And this is real time, so these are the delays that were really there.
Mooney 49 Victor, exit out the Monaco ramp via the east end, taxi 27 via Alpha 5, cross runway 3.
All right, well, exit the ramp on the east end and Alpha and cross runway 3.
Mooney 49 Victor, verify Sierra.
That's correct, we have Sierra.
So there I noticed I read back Alpha cross runway 3 to 27, and I didn't mention Alpha 5. So that was another little tiny error that I made. But now as I'm taxiing out, that splitting headache was still there. It was really strong. And right when I was about crossing runway 3, that butterfly feeling came back really strong. But it was only for about 15 seconds or 20 seconds. And then it went away about the time I was getting up to the Alpha 5 area to do the run up. And once it went away, my headache went away too. And I felt fine. And I remember sitting there wondering, like, what in the world? Why do I feel this way? Now, another thing, the preceding week, my daughter, who was 4 at the time, was sick. And being that she's 4, she wasn't able to articulate exactly how she was sick or what she was feeling, but we knew she was ill. I think she even missed a few days of daycare. And I just started assuming I was getting what she got. And that was enough in my mind to justify it, not think about it past that. And the flight home would have been actually but a little over an hour. And I thought, I'll just get home and I can be sick there. So I get to the run-up area. I'm feeling better. I do my run-up, and I always do a flow, and then I follow it with a checklist to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I get up and I run my flow, and I run my flow over and over and over again. And I don't remember if I was doing just the flow or if I was doing just the checklist over and over again, but I remember doing it several times over and over. Now I was sitting there for so long that I didn't even call the tower to ask for departure. They called me. So this is real time. It takes a little minute because I'm so slow, but I'm starting to get very impaired here.
Mooney 49er Victor, you ready to go? You need a few more minutes yet.
Yeah, we're just about ready to go.
So that sounded okay, but this is a real-time delay here. And I think it's probably, I don't have it timed, so I can't can't tell you, but I'm sitting here still finishing a checklist or doing something. And pretty quick. I don't even call the tower back. They call me and it's coming.
Mooney 49er Victor, turn left heading 240, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
And that's a normal delay.
All right, left 240, clear for takeoff one. We're gonna go now.
So those delays are not normal at all, obviously, with me. But what was going on that I didn't realize with carbon monoxide poisoning was how much it diminishes your cognitive ability. So I always thought that I would get the telltale illnesses as I went, and I would be able to recognize what was going on. But this whole system right here, with these radio calls, my cognitive ability was reduced substantially over normal Dan, right? And so none of this was making sense, and that's why it took so long to get the takeoff clearance to go. The other thing that was interesting, and this would maybe be something to explore down the road, was I never asked the tower for a clearance. They offered it to me as I was just parked there. I don't know if I would have. I was really suggestible at this time. The tower could have said, hey, why don't you turn the airplane off and walk back to the tower and we'll go out for dinner. I would have said, yeah, that sounds great. Like I would have done almost anything anyone told me at that point. And everyone's a little different, but it was something that could look at down the road where towers are required to get the request, not suggested or give it to them. But at any rate, so I took off on runway 27. I made my left turn. And the other thing, when I was reconstructing everything, I noticed that even though I did my long takeoff checklist and flow, I don't think I set my DG correctly because I never flew 240. So this would have been, I took off, made the left turn to 240. Now, as I took off and I put the landing gear up, when I put the landing gear up, that feeling of anxiety and butterflies came back really strong again. And this time it only lasted again like 20 seconds and it went away. And it was really confusing me. But here I turned to 240. What I should have been was 240. I was actually kind of heading this direction. But I turned 240 and they gave me traffic.
49 Victor, traffic heading to your right in a mile. The helicopter eventually turning southwestbound.
All right, 400 Victor is looking.
So you can kind of hear one, there was a little bit of a delay, and then there was I could definitely hear that I was more impaired than I was just a minute ago. So after that, then I get I never did see the helicopter. I thought I was on heading 240, and I get the handoff to departure and
Moody 9149 Victor, contact departure 125.45.
100 Victor.
So that didn't make any sense. And I already had the frequency tuned into the radio because I got it during my clearance. So I don't know why this is taking so long.
Good evening, departure, Mooney 9149 Victor. Climbing through 4,000.
Moody 49 Victor, you're still at tower, departure's 125.45.
So I didn't hit flip-flop. And I didn't say sorry or anything. I'm trying to flip it now, apparently.
Good afternoon, departure, Mooney 9149 Victor. Climbing through 4,300, 49 Victor.
So
49er Victor, departure, radar contact. Turn left, direct Winona, maintain 9,000.
Left track, Winona up to 9,000, 49 Victor.
So that was my last radio call, and I was definitely, I'd slurred one of those radio calls, and then I was kind of getting cognitively more and more impaired. Now during this time, I was having a really hard time figuring out what was going on. I knew something was wrong. I remember having my thumb over the autopilot disconnect button, and I remember thinking I have to tell them I have to come back and land. I don't know what's going on. I couldn't figure it out, but I kept kind of trudging along and doing the muscle memory things. And I do remember after that handoff, I entered direct enter into my 530 for Winona, and I hit my GPS steer button, which would have, or I hit direct enter, and I would have normally hit my GPS steer button because it was like muscle memory. Anytime I get that clearance too, it's boop boop and then hit the button. And I didn't hit it, but I did put it into the, I do remember putting it into the 530. Now that was the last thing I remember. And I believe I was unconscious very soonly after that. So this is the flight that I was supposed to take. This would have been direct to Winona at 9,000 feet. And this lost comm audio that I'm going to play now, that is not edit, or I did edit that for time because it's really long. So these sound like they were trying to contact me a little more often than what they actually were, but I just have it in here for
49er Victor, say altitude.
So no responses. They're starting to get mad. At this point, I would have climbed over 9,000 feet.
Morning, 49er Victor, Duluth.
So, and when I was in the climb, I had established a climb of 100.
Morning, 9er 1, 49er Victor, Duluth, out of here.
120 miles an hour, 105 knots. And I trimmed it, and then I had it on,
Morning,
I had it on a heading bug. So
Victor,
the autopilot was
Duluth Tower out
tracking
here.
the heading bug. So what ultimately happened was this. So
Morning, 9er 1, 49er Victor, Duluth, approach.
this was the direction I was flying the whole time. So it wasn't 240. There wasn't hardly any wind.
Morning, 9er 1, 49er Victor, backup transmitter, how you here, Duluth?
My airplane climbed up to 12,500 feet to 13,000, right in there.
Morning, 49er Victor, if
I
you hear
should probably
Duluth,
turn this
ident.
off, but I don't know how to do that. Anyway, just below 13,000 feet. And with the full rich mixture and full power, that's where it ran out of juice. So
Morning, 9er 1,
with a
49er
C-model
Victor, Duluth, if you hear Duluth, ident or acknowledge,
I'm going
please.
to turn this off now. Hold on a second. Anyway, with a C model Mooney,
On X-ray, you hear Duluth,
if,
okay?
if I would have leaned it out,
clear on both
you know,
transmitters,
beyond
helicopter 49er
anywhere lean of full rich, I would have went higher than 12.5. And I've had that airplane up to 17,000 before. And it did well getting up there.
November
So
9er 1,
I would have not
49
only
Victor. If you hear Duluth
I would have not only
Tower or
climbed
Duluth
much
Porch,
higher,
could you
but I would have
ident?
went a lot further. So this is how long it took to run through 22 gallons of gas. So I was unconscious right up here, and
Morning,
all
9er 1,
along
49er Victor, if you hear
okay,
Duluth,
this is the last one.
contact Minneapolis Center 121.05 and let them know what altitude you're climbing to.
All right, sorry about that, but just up here is where I lost consciousness, and I was out this
Morning, 9er 1,
way.
49er Victor, Duluth, how do you hear?
I thought it was over. And I got the transcript. I don't even need the audio, but I got the transcript of all of the ATC, all of the airliners, all of the people that were trying to contact me. And man, it was a lot of people. It was really impressive. And the next day when I did get my cell phone working again, I think I had 6 or 7 text messages from air traffic controllers, and I had 5 or 6 phone messages from air traffic controllers. So people were really doing whatever they could to contact me. So as I approached the Bravo, they were getting nervous, and they did launch 2 F-16s out of Madison to intercept me. And as I told this story in the past, I said that they intercepted me and they couldn't see anything and it was dark. Well, just a few months ago, I finally spoke to the lead fighter pilot that was part of that intercept, and they didn't ever catch me. They got to my area about the time I was in the descent after I ran out of gas. And then they were instructed to actually look for me further down range to see if I was still flying or whatever. So unfortunately, I didn't get to fly with F-16s, but I didn't remember it anyway. So I went right over the Bravo. And again, I was above the Bravo. I was up at 12.5. And then down here around Owatonna, I ran out of gas. And it was a 10-minute trip from engine shut off to touching the ground. And this is what I woke up to. And when I woke up, it was really dreamlike. I thought for sure that I was still flying, and I thought I dozed off, and I thought I got to call ATC, tell them I can come land. So I started keying the mic, and I was trying to do that. And as I was doing that, I noticed how beautiful my windscreen was. It was so clear. And I live in the Minnesota or the Mississippi River Valley. And in the summer, we get so many bugs that it's impossible to keep your window clean. I mean, you wash it almost after every flight, because especially in the early evening, it'll just get coated with bugs. And I was just impressed at how beautiful and clear it was. And then I was sitting there, I reached my hand forward, and I realized that it was missing. And once it was missing, I started thinking, well, there's some trees over there, and everything was really slow and dreamlike. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Now, as I was in there, off to my right wing, about a mile away, I saw a searchlight in a field off of a road. And right away, I knew they were looking for me. And I think I knew that I was on an IFR flight plan. They would have been paying attention, and they would have people out looking for me now. So I decided I had to get out of the airplane and get to where that light was. And I couldn't move my legs at all. I remember looking at the top of my knees, trying to wiggle my knees side to side, up or down or anything, and they were just dead. And I assumed I was paralyzed. And to show how impaired I was, it didn't bother me one bit. I was like, oh, well, I'm paralyzed now. Didn't even think about it. But it turned out after a while of fiddling around and trying to find stuff in the cockpit, because my hat and my gloves and everything on the seat were gone. Everything was rearranged in that airplane. I was like, I thought to myself, if I can wiggle my toes, I'm not paralyzed. They do that in movies all the time. So I started thinking about it, and I was able to wiggle my toes. So I thought, okay, this is good. And then I thought about it more and was trying to figure it out. And my feet were actually underneath the rudder pedals, and they were just kind of smashed in there. So I got my right foot out relatively easy. My left foot stayed stuck, and it took me a good, I have no idea in time, but I seem to think it took me 10 minutes to get out of that. I'm not really sure if it took me 30 seconds or 10 minutes, but it seemed to take a while. But once I got that out, I opened the door and I crawled out of the plane. Now, I didn't have my Carhartt jacket on yet. I didn't have my hat, didn't have my gloves. And my wife sent along Carhartt bib overalls. And she said, have those with you in case you have a forced landing, and you can put those on and you can hike out. So I had those in the back seat too. So I got those out first, and I was trying to put them on, and I fell over, and then I was laying on my wing trying to put them on, and I just couldn't get those things on. So then I went and grabbed my coat, put my coat on, and I couldn't zip it up because my hands were so cold. I had no dexterity at all. And reverse back to that, while I was in the plane, before I was trying to get the my feet unstuck, a friend of mine had a crash in Texas at night, or it wasn't he was on his way to Texas at night a few years before, and he called 911. And they came out to the airport, but he was off the end of the runway, and he thought to turn all the lights on. So any light on the plane that he could turn on, he did, and that's how rescuers saw him. So when I saw the searchlight, I thought I need to get lights on the plane, and none of the lights were working. All the panel lights weren't working at all. The nav lights, landing light obviously was in the cowl there, that was gone. Nothing would turn on. But I had an overhead light that had a rotary switch, and it was an old rotary switch similar to like you'd see on stoves and stuff to turn the lights on and off. Well, I could turn that one direction the wrong way, but I couldn't turn it the right way. So I don't know if that would have worked or not. But after all that frustration, I thought I got to get out and I got to get to help. So I go through the whole thing with the bib overalls and then get the coat on, and I wasn't able to zip the coat up. And I went back and searched around the plane a little bit looking for my gloves and my hat. And I couldn't find them at all. And so I just thought, well, I got a coat that's unzipped. I'll just go to help now. So I started stumbling off towards the direction I saw that light. And it turns out that was a downhill part of the field. And I started stumbling down, but I would only take 1 or 2 steps and I'd fall down, and then I would get up and I'd take a few more and fall down. I'd crawl a little bit and I'd get up. And I remember falling backwards a few times and swearing because that wasn't the direction I wanted to go. If I fell forward, I was at least making progress. So it was a bit of a struggle. And I got maybe 75 to 100 yards away from the airplane. And I remember I was really cold. I think I was cold. The feelings were really different than what I would expect. But I just was exhausted and spent. and I rolled over on my back and I just kind of laid there. Meanwhile, from being pinned in the airplane and awake till this point, there was a helicopter that kept flying over, and I knew they were looking for me too. I didn't know anything about who they were or what they were, but they were getting closer and closer. And if I remember right, they're flying like an east to west, west to east. And as I laid down in this field and I rolled over on my back, the helicopter flew directly overhead. And I was yelling and waving my arms and everything, but it was dark now. It was 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. They couldn't see me. And I thought to myself, if they didn't see me and they didn't see my airplane, because they were just 600 feet above me, I don't have a chance. They're not gonna find me. And then I started getting kind of comfortable. I started getting warmer. And the stars were beautiful. It was a moonless night. That was really important too, to talk about why it was they didn't see me. It was a moonless night, but it was a high pressure. There was no clouds anywhere. So the stars were unbelievably beautiful. And I'm laying there on the ground, I'm getting warm. And I thought, well, if they find me, that's fine. And if they don't find me, that's fine too, because I'm comfortable now. And I just kind of was giving up. And as I was laying there, I was looking straight up at Pleiades, the star cluster. You always see it in the night sky here. And 3 years prior, my wife was going into labor, and it was midnight, and I was pushing her into my truck. And she said, we knew it was a girl because we did the ultrasound, figured that out, but we didn't have a name for her. And I was pushing her into the truck, and she stopped. I remember stopping right when I was pushing, and she stopped, and she goes, "We don't have a name for this girl yet." And I looked up then, and Pleiades was right above us. And I said, we could name her Maya. And Maya is it was the eldest sister in the 7 sisters of Pleiades. The name was Maya. So that's how we named our daughter, was because of Pleiades. And so I'm laying there in the field, and I'm looking straight up at Pleiades. And that moment of pushing my wife into the truck popped back in my brain. And then I realized who I was and what my life was like. Because up until this point, I didn't have any clue. I didn't even think about it. And this way, all of a sudden, I realized that I have a family and that I have a business and everything about it. And that gave me just a tremendous amount of strength. So I was able to sit up again, and I thought, I got to get to help, because it's been painful to get this far. But if I die here, or if I die someplace else trying to get to help, the end result's still death. So I thought, no matter how bad it hurts to try to get to help, it's not a sacrifice. It's worth it. And it was really a blessing, because it was the first time in my life, adult life, that I never had anything to do. I only had one thing to do, and that was get to help. Nothing mattered. I didn't have to worry about paying bills or fixing a car or anything. It was all I had to do was get to help. And it was really cool. So I got up and I started stumbling back towards the airplane, because I looked around, and back at the airplane, on the other side of the airplane, was a wood line. And then through the woods, there was some lights, and there was a couple buildings, like some outbuildings. And I thought, that's my best place to get to help, because everything else I'd looked at was a long way away. So I walked and crawled and fell and whatever back to the airplane. But as I was approaching the airplane, the longer I went without being in the cockpit, of being intoxicated, the more motor skills I got, and the more cognitive ability came back. So by the time I got back to the airplane, I remember tapping on the horizontal stabilizer right here and thanking it, because I knew that the airplane saved my life. And a Mooney, the build of the Mooney really did a great job in saving my life with how strong they are. These are pictures taken just a little bit after I crashed. But so I get back to the airplane, and then I go from the airplane, and I walk up to this wood line, because it's in between me and this light I see. And as I get up to the woods, I remember there was this gnarly underbrush and stuff. And I don't know if I said out loud or I said it in my mind, but I said, if I was healthy, I would walk around this. I said, but I gotta go straight. I gotta get to that light. So I go into this brush, and I get all tangled up, and I get stuck. And it took a while of fiddling around there that I realized I was pressed against a barbed wire fence. Unfortunately, I had a really good jacket on, so I didn't get injured from that. But I was stuck on a barbed wire fence. I freed myself from that and I crawled underneath it. And then I was in the woods, and the woods had quite a bit more snow. You can see in these pictures, there's snow on the ground, but it's not real deep. It was really windswept, but in the woods, it wasn't as windswept, and there was maybe 1.5 feet of snow that I was kind of trudging through. So that was a downside, but a bonus was it had trees that I could kind of grab onto and steady myself. So I only fell a few times in the woods, but I remember in the wooded section falling and crawling a little bit, and my hands didn't have gloves and they were underneath snow and they were just like bricks. I couldn't feel them. They were heavy. I couldn't hardly move them. And I remember just being angry that like, I'm going to live through this, and my frostbite's going to be so bad, I'm going to lose my hands. And it really bothered me. But fortunately that didn't happen. But I get up to the side of this building. I kind of get through the woods, and I skimmy up the side of the building, and I go around the corner, and about 75 feet away, there's a house, and the house had the blue flicker of a TV light in the window. And I was really excited, and I made my way across this frozen driveway without falling at all. So I think that showed again how my cognitive abilities and my motor skills were coming back the longer I was without it. The other thing that was interesting, this is just a side thing, was I had 22 gallons or 23 gallons in the right tank, and the left tank I had 18 gallons. And the FAA examiner, the investigator, when he came the next day, said there was no fuel in either tanks and no fuel staining, which I don't quite understand that. I think it had, I was running on the right tank, so the left tank would have had 18 gallons. It must have leaked out and he didn't see the stain, but I thought that was interesting. So this is the FlightAware track overlaid on Google Earth. It's off just a little bit. It should be, this is looking north, and it should be just a little bit to the west, because here's the house that I walked to, and this is the field that I went into at this angle. So from the ditch and the power lines to the trees, I had 800 feet. And my airplane actually only traveled from the first impact site to the stop about 500 feet. I couldn't have did that if I was awake. So this is actually the impact, roughly the impact path. The first impact was actually a little further down from that. It was right around here. It was in the low spot of the field. And the airplane then bounced and went airborne another 300 feet, and then impacted and skidded about 200 feet and stopped. And when it stopped, it was facing this way. So, and my left wing was here. So I was, when I was looking out, kind of parking, looking up a hill. And so I wasn't seeing anything in front of me really, other than a little bit of the ground. So that's why I thought I was still flying. Now over here is the Crabtree house that I marched to. So I went, it was interesting. I would have walked, and I was laying over here in the field. I didn't know there was a road here. And then I walked back to the airplane, and then this way to the house, which is strange because the light is right here on a pole. I don't know why I went back to the airplane. But this is where I got into the house. So I went up to the back window that had the TV flicker, and I pounded on the glass and scared the daylights out of Cynthia Crabtree, who lives there. Her husband was driving bus for the girls' basketball team, so he wasn't home. And here a guy is pounding on her back window with a bloody face, stumbling, sounding drunk, saying he needed help. And I don't know if I would have opened the door, but she went and opened the door, and I went through her garage, and she brought me right into her house, and I told her I'd crashed and I needed to get to help. And she was able to get a hold of the authorities, and within 2.5 minutes, sheriff's deputy was there, and he was only with me for 2 or 3 minutes, I think, and then the paramedics showed up. So after the paramedics showed up, they loaded me into an ambulance. They took me back, I believe, over here, which is where the helicopter that was looking for me landed. And my understanding was that was a medical helicopter out of the Twin Cities that was airborne when I was coming down, and ATC told them there's an airplane going down. So they were just trying to look. They had no idea if they, if I was alive or dead, or I'm sure they all assumed it was going to be a death. And they ended up picking me up and flying me to the Mayo Clinic, and which was just fantastic. Now, here's the next day. I got to bring up my injuries. My wife always gets mad when I don't talk about my injuries. They also would have made it difficult to move around. I had 3 broken vertebrae. My upper jaw was broken. I knocked out some teeth. And the upper jaw, the broken upper jaw was really eerie because it was broke off in 2 sections. So my teeth were all together and mounted together, but they were loose in my mouth. It was very strange. I had a puncture in my knee that was really deep, and I had the frostbite on my hands that was quite bad. Now, this picture was taken the next morning. You can see my Carhartt bib overalls from me trying to put them on. We're laying there. The gear was up. Another thing when I talk about Moonies that's amazing is the doors work. And after almost every accident, the Mooney fuselage is intact enough that the doors work, which is really amazing. So the doors work. The airplane was really destroyed. It looks pretty good right now, but there wasn't 4 square inches really anywhere that didn't have a wrinkle or a ripple in it. And it broke open. You'll see, here's the firewall, and that was tore open. That allowed a lot of air in underneath. That also is a lot of dirt came piling into the cockpit. And then the other thing was the window. So it broke out right in front of me. It was just a miracle that it did. This is all condensation from my breath as I was passed out. The best I can figure out is I was unconscious for about 2 hours. I lost consciousness, flew for an hour and a half, crashed in this field, and it was probably half an hour before I woke up. This is the inside of the airplane. You can see on the left side of the panel and the right side of the panel, the airplane was torn open to the outside. The glare shield was missing, and then down on the right side especially, there was where a lot of dirt came in when the firewall had separated. So what is carbon monoxide? I'll just quick go through kind of the schoolwork of all this. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, invisible, tasteless gas. We've all heard that. That's from incomplete burning of fossil fuels. Now, I don't fully understand it, but when you're running, especially rich at peak, you can produce a lot of carbon monoxide. When you are lean at peak, they tell me you don't produce hardly any. But when it's inhaled, it attaches to your hemoglobin. Your hemoglobin are in your blood, and they transport the oxygen around your body. So they go to your lungs, get oxygen, go to your body, get the oxygen where it needs to go, come back empty, and they get more oxygen. So, but the CO will attach just like the oxygen will attach. But the CO attaches 200 times stronger than the oxygen. So if they're going to compete with each other, the CO is almost always going to win. And it doesn't take a lot of CO then to cause a big problem. So if the O2 saturation of the atmosphere is 22, 23%, something like that. If you have just 5% or of CO, that's enough to overwhelm the oxygen that's around. And so it does poison you some, but its main thing, I believe, is it's a hypoxia because it starves you from oxygen. But what's interesting, and so because of the strong bond, not a lot of CO will poison you over time. And it builds. So the half-life of CO in your body, I've heard numbers from 4 to 5 hours, and I've heard numbers as high as 8 hours. Either way, it's not short. So if you have a flight in the morning like I did, that's 2.5 hours, and I get some into my bloodstream, and I go 4 or 5 hours over the day out of the airplane. When I come back to the airplane, it's still in me. It's only half of what it was when I landed, but it's still there. So especially with aviation, we can have small amounts, and they can kind of ratchet up over flights if we do multiple flights in a day. And that's what got me. So these are 2 charts that I had, we've all seen them. They're from FAA literature, and we go through them when we were learning to fly. And these are kind of what I had known. I'm a CFI. I taught about CO to my students, and I would use these charts and information like these. And here on the one on the left, it talks about concentration in the air. And so at 9 parts per million, it's, they talk about maximum allowable concentration for short exposure in a living area goes up to 50 parts per million, maximum allowable concentration for an 8-hour work period. I think OSHA is actually 35 parts per million on that, but they have it clicking up and how bad it is. And then on the right chart is the percent of CO in your blood and your typical symptoms. And this one really got me because when I read it, okay, under 10 parts, there's no symptoms. 10 to 20 parts or percent, you have a slight headache. And then at 21 to 30, you get a headache, slight increase in respirations and drowsiness. And it's built so it sounds like it's linear. I thought I would start to feel unwell. And then I thought, and the other thing they don't talk about is the lack of cognition that you get along with these. But I thought I would be able to see this stuff coming and then take action. And so I didn't have a carbon monoxide detector. But the symptoms weren't linear at all. So I would have a headache and it would go away. I'd get butterflies, they would go away. And then none of the symptoms except for the last flight and the last 10 to 15 minutes of the first flight did I have symptoms in the airplane. The flight from to Duluth from Canada was perfect. And the whole flight going up, I felt fine. So I wasn't connecting the way I was feeling with the airplane. I was connecting it with these external factors, anxiety, no caffeine, and then my daughter being sick. So it really it was really structured to get me on that. So it's very similar to hypoxia because a lot of us have done altitude chambers or reduced oxygen training. And so we all know what that feels like. And now hypoxia, we know changes, or it can change. Your symptoms can change over time, whether it be the same week or year, and they might be different. That's why they encourage us to always go through those chambers so we know how we feel. But I believe CO would probably do similar things. It would change based on other things going on. So the symptoms are going to be unique. So if you were with me on this day, you might have had headaches at different times or not had them or had them worse, or who knows, but we're all different. Symptoms aren't linear. They're not like this chart over here. And it's very easy to justify the symptoms. Like I said, I had 3 good reasons for how I was feeling that way. And then when you're experiencing the symptoms, the biggest takeaway for me that I learned here was that your cognitive ability goes down. And so by the time you're starting to get a good headache, you're not quite there to make the connections to figure out what's going on. Now, how does it get in the cabin? In airplanes, and we have the engine in front of us, almost all of us. There's canards and things that don't do this, but we've got the engine in front of us, and the exhaust is usually in front of us. And then our heaters produce the heat by running hot or running cold air over a hot exhaust component, whether it be the muffler or a pipe, to heat it. So if there's a compromise in that muffler or on the pipe that it's going around, we're going to get exhaust into the cabin. So compromising the muffler can allow CO to enter the cabin. And almost all of us have engines in front of us. So that's also where a lot of the CO that gets in that we're seeing now is coming in through firewalls and wheel wells and wing roots and the tail. And it's the exhaust system's healthy, and that's not giving it to us. But the fact is that the exhaust is leaving the airplane forward, and the airplane creates generally a negative pressure in the cabin. It can draw in gases that way too. So piston twins aren't as risky, but they are because many of them have the CO gas heater. And so piston twins aren't generally going to get CO from a leaky door seal or something, but they will, if they're running their heater and the gas heater isn't maintained, it could allow CO in also. So it's after my accident, I really started to research CO and look into it more. And the thing that was really shocking to me is that it's not just a winter or northern climate thing. They happen equally in all seasons and climates. So if you're in Florida and you just fly down there, you're just as at risk of it as statistically as you are if you live in Minnesota and you're flying in the winter. So only 50% of the CO accidents have happened with compromises in the heating system. The other thing that's interesting is I don't think the CO data is very, very good on accidents. I believe a lot more accidents happen as CO as a factor that was never ever tested. How did CO get into my cabin? And here's my muffler. And this muffler had about 750 hours on it. And there was a crack right in the middle, and it was a 4-into-1 under the engine. And I think it was just some slip joints or something that weren't doing what they're supposed to do. And that's where the main stress of it was, and it cracked. It was a stress fracture. The material was relatively thick there. It wasn't rusted or corroded out to the point where you'd expect that. So what can we do to protect ourselves? Dumb luck. That's what I was using, and it worked for me this time, but I wouldn't count on it with anyone else. Good aircraft maintenance is obvious. We always want to keep an eye on our exhaust systems, our airplanes in general, but in terms of CO, making sure the exhaust systems are healthy. But more importantly of anything, everyone should have a CO detector in the cockpit. Most of us probably do now. Since my accident, a lot more people have been getting them. Yeah.
Should I run our poll question about the CO detector?
Sure.
All right. I
Yeah.
have a poll question for you guys. What type of carbon monoxide detector do you have? And the answers are paper yellow dot, a handheld, a panel mounted, or none. And I'm going to let those answers keep rolling in. And I'm going to end our poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then I will share the results with everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
So paper yellow dot is 28%. Handheld is 30%. Panel mounted 20%, and none is 22%.
Okay, good. So we've got a solid 50% that I'm talking to then, because we'll get into that in a minute here. Let's see. So the types of detectors, this is what we were just talking about. So there's the spot detectors. There's the chemical spot and the biometric spot. And I'm not smart enough to understand what the actual differences is or how they work. But the one of them, the biometric, lasts longer than the chemical ones. The chemical ones are usually like 30 days. And the other ones are much longer. Now, where these are bad is apparently they can be triggered or ruined by cleaners when we clean in the cockpit and things. I don't recommend them at all. The NTSB told me it's like when they find them in a crash, they can look at them and know how you died, but they don't really help too much. Now there's home detectors, and when I talk to people, people always tell me that they can, I bought this one for $29 at Walmart and it's great, which is fine. These are much better than what I had, which was nothing. And they're probably better than the chemical spots and the biometric spot detectors, but they're made to this UL standard. And what the standard does mainly is make sure that they work, but it makes sure that they don't go off all the time, because we have a lot of CO in our house on occasion. Sometimes a garage will let in CO, or when we're starting our furnace, or a gas stove or whatever. So they don't want these things going off all the time, and people call in the fire department. So they have a setup that at 70 parts per million, at above 70 parts per million, the alarm is supposed to start in 60 to 240 minutes. Now that goes up to, I think I don't have the whole standard here, but it's something like 70 to, they have it broken down. So it's 70 parts per million above, that's the time frame. And at like 200 parts per million, there's a time frame. And I think at 400 parts per million, it has to go off within like 10 minutes or something. So it's not really great for the airplane. It would be okay for a catastrophic alarm. It more than likely would have alerted me that I had a problem before and I wouldn't have crashed. But they're not that much cheaper than the other detectors I'm going to show in a minute. And those can help so much more with maintenance and preventing accidents and then maintenance well before that's a problem. So these are just some sampled pictured ones. But these high resolution portable detectors you can buy, most of them will do real-time readouts in parts per million. They will do it down to 0 on up. And if you can find one that has alarms that you like, the sensor cons are the ones I run for portables, and they have visuals and audible and a vibratory alarm in them. So you can, if you're going to wear it, you can get it to vibrate. Or I have one on my panel so I can see the lights flash. The audible alarms on most of these small ones are pretty tough to hear in the cockpit, or can be, but they're sensitive enough to give us immediate feedback of the health of the exhaust system. So when I do a run up now, I have a turbo Mooney now, but when I used to fly carbureted airplanes, you'd run the carb heat during the run up. Well, now I run cabin heat, and I check every flight to see how healthy my exhaust is. And if I see any rise at all when I turn cabin heat on versus off, I know there's something that isn't quite going right. And it would give me plenty of time to figure out what might be wrong, or get it fixed at a shop that I want to fix it at, and not be stuck at some cold airport in the middle of the night. There's Guardian. I believe there's other manufacturers now too, but Guardian was the pioneers in the panel mounted units. I also have a Guardian, and what's great about those is they're always in the airplane. You don't forget them. They're always on because you wire them in. I mean, they're wired into your airplane's electrical system, and some of them have the ability to interface with your audio panel, so you can get audible alerts on your headset, which is great. And then some of them also will interact with engine monitors, PFDs, that kind of thing, and give a display of the parts per million that it's seeing, which is really nice. Now, as technology is growing, we got more and more stuff coming out. So there's the Sentry ADSB receivers. They have one built in, which is really nice. And there might be some other ADSB receivers that have them built in. Lightspeed just came out with the Delta Zulu headset, which is pretty nice. It's got a carbon monoxide detector built into it. It's got a few other features too that really kind of enhance flying and the safety. Now, all of these will require some maintenance. All the detectors have life limits on them. Lightspeed's saying they got 10 years on theirs right now, and I think Sentry's probably the same. So at some point, it'll either have to get refurbished or not counted on. Pulse oximeters, I don't care if you fly at 4,500 feet all the time or if you go higher, everybody should have one. These things are like $20, $25, and it's amazing what you can get out of them. When I first got mine, I didn't have portable oxygen, and I got one. And after the first flight, I ordered a portable oxygen system because it was unbelievable how low my saturations were compared to what I thought they should be. The FAA's rules of 12,500 feet for O2 after half an hour and 14,000 above all the time they're conservative in the wrong direction. And most of us really could use oxygen at 10,000 feet. So anyway, everyone should get one and have one and use one, but they don't detect CO. And I didn't know this before. So when I was on that first flight of the day and I had that thing on my finger, I had an increase in my normal O2 sats, and I thought I was doing good. But what it is that they work just by looking at the color of your blood, basically. And the O2 or the carbon monoxide bound to the hemoglobin just makes your blood a little redder, or whatever color they're looking for. And so it actually increases. So I was seeing an increase because I was being poisoned, and I had no idea. So how much is acceptable when you get a good detector and you figure this out? Usually it's measured in parts per million, and OSHA allows 35 parts per million for a work day. CO exposure plus altitude plus time, I put not good. There hasn't been a lot of studies done on it, but it certainly is much worse when we start to struggle with hypoxia anyway, which we are when we're flying. So if we're up at 11,000 feet and we're getting 50 parts per million of CO, that is more than likely much worse than being at sea level with 50 parts per million. So we just shouldn't tolerate CO in aviation at all. Once you get a detector and you're flying your plane and you're figuring it out, almost everybody I know can get their plane, so there's virtually no CO. You'll see some on the ground when you're doing run-ups and when you're taxiing around and things. And some guys see it in climb, some guys see it in descent, but the goal should be 0 at cruise. And if you do see that you get 10 parts per million or 15 parts per million in this phase of flight, whatever it may be, you can use that to figure out why. When you put the gear down, you get a little CO through the gear wells or something, just so you understand why. And then fix it if it can be fixed or if you need to fix it. But more importantly is understand it and expect it. So the next time you're flying and it is off and it's instead of 15 parts per million, you're at 30 parts per million or something, it's an alarm bell and you take some sort of action. So this is just a quick flight over my crash field here. My airplane came to rest right about here. You can kind of see it's an upslope. And I walked over here and walked back and just through these little woods to get to the house. This is looking over the pole I would have came down on. I would have came down this way and impacted someplace right down here. And this is looking the other direction. So I came right over the top of this barn and outbuilding. I cleared, this is a hill here, so I was relatively close to these, I assume. I came over the power lines and then impacted right down here. Don't mind the cat using the restroom. This is my daughter. We were there meeting with the Crabtrees and looking things over. And I just put this picture on there because it shows the how unlevel the field was. So if I was in that area and I had an engine failure, that wouldn't have been a field I even picked to land in. But there are so many miracles to get me through this. And one of them was the shape of that field and that I impacted it in the right spot. I mean, literally, any sooner I would have probably hit power lines, and any later the terrain was going up, and I'm afraid that my impact would have been much more violent. And I would have been traveling fairly fast at that point. Here's me and Cynthia Crabtree. This isn't too long after my accident, and this is the window I pounded on right here, and this is the door to her garage where I walked in. Now, for carbon monoxide detectors, there's, like I said, I've worked a lot with SensorCon, getting these out to pilots, and they've went and created a aviation version, which is just a rebrand of their other one. But it's a really well-built unit. They have good customer service, and they do offer a 20% discount right now. I don't get anything out of this. This is just to help pilots convince them to buy it. And the discount code is aircraft 2022-2. There's 3 2s at the end. I don't know why they did that. And it's still working, even though it seems dated. But if anyone's interested, these are good detectors. They're portable. I've had great luck with them. And we've sold several thousand of them in aviation now. I want to say, well, we're able to track it through the discount code because that's given out by me. So it's like 2,500 that have been sold so far. And then there's also the Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset. If you're in the market for a new headset, it's worth a look. I've been really impressed with mine so far, and the CO is really nice. Now, that's the last slide I have. One thing I want to mention is I really believe it's a good idea to have 2 CO detectors. So if you have a headset, you might want a panel mount or a SensorCon, or if you have a Sentry, it'd be a good idea to have another one. That's the only way we can really know that they fail, is if one's reading 0 and the other one's reading 100, something's wrong, and it's worth looking at. So I think that's about it. So if there's any questions, we